of Gemini Energy Solutions. Anthony is the founder and CEO of Gemini Energy Solutions, a team of experts working to implement strategies for overcoming cultural and socioeconomic barriers that are preventing the vast majority of Americans from being aware and engaged with energy efficiency. Gemini, operating nationwide, also partners with municipalities such as San Francisco International Airport and Memphis, Tennessee, to support their efforts to meet their climate change goals and increase economic resiliency through energy efficiency. Welcome, Dr. Anthony Kinslow II. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Let's see.
Your
I'm
slides
not muted. This is usually I mute myself and I get caught on that. So this was a rare time that I'm not muted this time. Thank you all for the time and everyone that's in attendance. The goal for my talk today is threefold, really. The first is to provide an example for why I believe centering equity and inclusion is not just the right thing to do, but it's the fastest and most cost-effective method to accelerate our decarbonization efforts. The second is to provide some basic checks for you to determine whether a solution is indeed equitable and inclusive. Not all inclusive, but some checks. And then the third is to introduce some of the ways I'm personally working to accelerate decarbonization through equity and inclusion. So I expect this to take about 20 minutes, and then we'll have some audience interaction, and then I will have about 10 minutes for Q&A. So now, based on the audience, I'm not going to go into why we need to accelerate decarbonization. I feel that everybody, if you're here, you already have that same feeling and understanding of where we are in climate change, etc. But I do want to provide the definitions in equity and inclusion that I use in my day-to-day efforts. So first, 3 goals for today. Sorry, I should have clicked over when I did it. Excuse me.
That book like broke my heart as a child. I was just talking about that recently. Like that's an intense one.
Yeah. So my personal focus is in racial equity, which means working to understand the racial injustices that are being committed today and have been committed in the past, and how they impact, in particularly marginalized communities of color's efforts to decarbonize. For this conversation, I'm going to focus on African Americans, as that is my comfort area, which also brings, of course, to the forefront the importance of a diverse group of presenters. So I'm so glad that there is a diverse group of presenters across these last 2 days to give you a whole range of perspectives and expertise. And so when explaining equity, to my class, to my students, the first image I show is this one. And I asked them to explain what is inaccurate about this image. So I purposely had this up a little while for a few moments so that you could maybe check to see if you figured out what's going on and why this may be inaccurate. Any thoughts, feel free to put them in the messenger. I personally like this image because it has a nice representation of all the different boxes, and it shows that in this case, a taller ladder is the resource needed to provide an equitable solution. So didn't see anybody putting anything in the chat, but what is missing, in my opinion, what is missing in the image is the buckets of apples that the person on the left already has based on the historical advantage that they've realized by having the tree tilted towards them. Does that make sense to everybody? That essentially over the years, the person on the left has been able to pick apples with ease. Even when we finally had equality with such laws such as separate, Brown v. Board of Education, where all of a sudden it was equal, we still had the issue of it being inequitable. Yes, generational wealth. Thank you. And so what this image is really missing is that that aspect of generational wealth, the aspect of advantages and examples of that have from generation to generation. And so for the purposes of this, my definition of equity is one, solutions that would enable effective results by accounting for the historical and continued injustices that have been committed toward the group of interest. And inclusion, an inclusive solution is a solution that is accessible to the group of interest and perceived as congruent with their identity. I think these things are critically important, and I'll get into them later on as well. It is also important to note that based on these definitions, that neither of these are sufficient without the other, right? Just because you have equitable solution, if people don't have access to it, doesn't really matter. And what we are seeing throughout the US is that there's a deficiency in both equity and inclusiveness. So now that we've established the definitions, let's go back to the first goal of this talk. How does providing equity and inclusion accelerate decarbonization? To do that, I want to establish some premises that I hope everyone can agree with. So number one, 100% of the buildings need to be upgraded and electrified. Number two, or before I get to number two, sorry, upgrading these entails efficiency, reducing the energy necessary to provide the same outputs or greater, right? That's LED light bulbs, controls on light switches, timers for your outlets, water saving measures, demand response technology, building management systems, etc. Electrification is removing the need for fossil fuels on site, induction stovetops, hot water heat pumps, air source heat pumps. This is not anything new for most of you, right? Premise number two. Today, it is the responsibility of each building owner to upgrade and electrify. Now, there are, of course, incentives, rebates, and tax benefits to enhance or entice that decision, but it still comes down to the building owner to find the financial means to do so. Premise number three. Because of the historical and current injustices, the majority of Americans are unable or unwilling to upgrade and electrify their building. Now, when I say unable, three situations come to mind. Financially, they cannot. Now, when I say unwilling, two situations come to mind. One, unwilling to take on debt to upgrade and electrify. So they could technically, but they don't see the reason for it. And then second one is an example that happened in my family is they do not have an example of electrification. So they're unwilling to switch to something they've never seen before. My uncle and aunt in Virginia Beach were upgrading their kitchen a few months ago. And I said, hey, why don't you get an induction stovetop? Get rid of your natural gas. And the response was essentially, we've never seen it before. We never used it before. We're not going to spend all that money just to do that. Right. And that seems like a fair response. You know, how do you spend thousands of dollars on something that you've never seen before or had any use before? And so I really kind of got stuck with that. I couldn't convince them otherwise. So we got a few more premises though. Premise 4. We need solutions that can address those who are unable or unwilling. Premise 5, to implement the upgrades and electrification in the time that makes a difference. We, of course, all know that there is a ticking clock for all of this decarbonization. We need to dramatically increase the workforce by order of magnitude at least. Right? In premise 6, it is easier and more comfortable to engage with your own community around decarbonization, and you are more likely to be successful in doing so compared to engaging with another community. Easy example is me engaging with going to a Black neighborhood in Baltimore where I grew up and talking about decarbonization or trying to convince someone. I'm probably going to be more successful, not necessarily guaranteed to be successful, but I'll probably be more successful than if I go to a Mexican neighborhood and Arizona and trying to convince them, right? My fifth grade Spanish probably wouldn't do very well. They probably wouldn't take kindly to me just trying to tell them what to do, and I would probably have several cultural missteps in that process of trying to do so, right? So now starts the interactive portion. These are 6 premises that I presented to you, the audience, today, and I want to give you an opportunity to say whether or not you agree with these 6 premises with a word cloud. So take the time. You can either go online or you can text which premise is problematic for you, like whether you disagree with one or you want some more evidence to support this. You let me know. You can just text the words. So like if it was number 6, SIX, or premise number 5, FIVE. So as you were looking at those premises, did any of them stick out to you as problematic?
I'm gonna guess that in this crowd, probably none of them. I mean, truly.
There you go. Well, I'll give one more moment just to check. Yes. Let me put in the link.
And by the way, I could put one out there. The idea that we have to do a tenfold increase in the workforce because air conditioners are heat pumps. And so I think that one of the things we could do is we could use the existing air conditioner workforce to install HVAC heat pumps, you know, and electric hybrid heat pump water heaters and with electric resistance backup are not importantly different from, they are different, but not like importantly different from an electric resistance, just straight up electric resistance water heater that plumbers know how to install. So this is me being hopeful. I am a if you know when we become even closer acquaintances and friends and such, you'll discover I'm just nonstop optimistic. So that's I'm more optimistic and hopeful about not needing to scale up radically the workforce to accomplish this, just because of the
Well,
challenge. No other reason.
well, I will address that. Apologies. I'm not sure if I can go back. Let's see. Let me go back for a moment and show the premises for 2 minutes. Let everybody review it, and then we'll go back to the poll. Yeah, regarding the need to drastically increase the workforce, what we've been experiencing across the country is that contractors aren't in any trouble finding jobs, right? Like they have their pipeline filled out, they have the people they want. In fact, we're finding it very difficult to find contractors who aren't extremely busy to do different implementations, and which tells us that we're kind of at capacity. Additionally, a lot of plumbers, electricians are aging out.
Right.
So those two considerations taken, and then you take into account the number of buildings that we need to reach. Right now, for our 2035, we would need to reach 25,000 commercial buildings a month, 25,000 a month, and to do an energy audit and then implement upgrades and electrification. For residential, where there's over 120 homes, that 120 million single family homes, that's not including multifamily, duplexes, etc. You can imagine how many of those need upgraded or electrification, and what that means in terms of the number of homes that receive an energy audit and then be upgraded per month over a 13-year period. The fact is, we just don't have the numbers, even in existing HVAC to heat pump, as you so aptly connected, to do that type of level. Where the best estimate was that we're at a couple thousand a month right now on the commercial side, versus 25,000.
Okay, you win.
I'm moving back over to the poll now. We'll see. Number 3, number 2, 5. Oh, the 3 reasons Americans are unable to electrify their building. One, they may not be eligible for the loan. Their credit score may not be high enough. Another was let's see. I have my notes here. As people are still putting in things, they financially cannot just afford, they just simply can't afford it. And then and the other one was the services are not available in the area. So they essentially don't have anybody that can provide the services to upgrade or electrify where they are. All right, so I'm seeing number 2 and number 3. So number 2 was today is the responsibility of each building owner to upgrade and electrify. So there are examples where it's not the responsibility, and I'll get into that before. But today, if you think about solutions, one of the major issues is the renter-owner kind of connection, or the tenant-owner, however you want to call it. And that's because there's this misaligned incentives, right? The tenant may want to upgrade if they're paying the energy bill, but there's really no reason for the building owner to put that money down, especially if the tenant could leave at any moment and not pay them back for it. Right now, if you think about incentives, rebates, even tax credits, the only way you're able to get that in most cases are if you are going to be owning the equipment, and by default, typically that's owning the building. There are, of course, exceptions to that. Number 3, someone said, because of the historic and current injustices, the majority of Americans are unable or unwilling to upgrade and electrify their building. I'm going to actually touch on that in a little bit, so I'm going to hold on to that. Number 5 and number 6 came up also. In order of time, I'll be really quick with that. Number 6 is easier, more comfortable. I really don't have a response to that other than, any psychological study or science paper you look into will show that there's an increased inherent trust when you are dealing with someone who looks more like you. It's one of the issues that we have with hiring biases, right? Is that we tend to want to hire and have a favorable look upon someone that resembles us and seems like us. But yeah, let's keep driving on with this. I appreciate all the inputs. Maybe if I can go forward. There we go. Sorry. There we go. All right, so here's where I try to convince you. The methane gas paradox is what I'm calling this. And essentially, as more buildings are electrified, the cost of methane gas, the main ingredient in natural gas, will increase. This theory behind this is less people paying for the service means the service is going to be higher, right? And now this market adoption curve provides a strong symbolism of what is happening with funds right now. Right now, the industry solutions are debt-based, a rebate, incentive. You have to still pay for you to get that benefit. In other words, if you cannot pay for electrification, your only option is to go into debt to pay for it. As such, we are witnessing slow adoption by primarily white affluent households. And we're seeing this not just in electrification, but we saw it over the last decade with solar adoption as well. And but in this case, as the cost of natural gas goes up, it will convince those who can afford the upfront cost to switch, while those who cannot afford the upfront cost will just suffer greater monthly energy costs. Now, electrification of a home at a minimum is thousands of dollars. And according to a new report, as of January 2021, only 39% of Americans could pay for a $1,000 emergency expense, right? 39% of Americans this year could afford that. Now, for those thinking that that's just because of the pandemic, in 2016, a Forbes article came out saying that it was only 37%. So it's actually gotten better despite the pandemic, which is kind of crazy. Which also means that the majority of the country cannot afford to electrify their home. Therefore, as we start to enter the early majority phase, we will have to spend billions of dollars for those who can afford it and have unnecessarily burden the majority of Americans. We would have spent, from all the incentives and rebates, we would have spent billions of dollars to help pay for upgrades and electrification for those who can afford it, while millions of Americans are just suffering the consequences of not being able to afford it. And as a result, the adoption rate will slow to a trickle before policy and money arise for electrification of those who could not afford it. And I think we all understand how slow policy can be in addressing these type of issues. Now, what do you think would happen if we took all the money going into incentivizing those who can already afford to electrify and put it into supporting those who cannot afford electrification? We would instantly see a rise of adoption in electrification, and the rise would not slow to a trickle as gas rates increase, but continue to increase as natural gas prices rise, because the people who can afford it would naturally switch over based on market pressure. So what I'm presenting to you is a scenario where if we focus on those who can afford it, who are the marginalized people of color who because of historical disadvantages, often do not have the capital to afford electrification, we focus on them first. We start moving a larger number of people, and then as gas prices rise, the rest will follow because they can afford to, and they'll be pressured to because it just makes economic sense, which means it'll be more cost effective because we're not giving money to those who can already afford it, and it'll be faster because we'll have this movement occurring. So that's my argument for why. That's one example of why equity and inclusive solutions could be more cost effective and faster for accelerating decarbonization. Now, with time, I want to jump to the 4 simple checkpoints to determine if your solution is both equitable and inclusive. The first is, are you compensating individuals and organizations for their time? Right. This ranges from workforce development efforts to community-based organizations doing outreach on your behalf. Just because you have a free workforce development program doesn't mean it's equitable. That is still their time that they're putting forth and not having money for their family and for themselves. Are the individuals and / organizations who are providing the service representative of the community, or at minimum familiar and comfortable engaging with the community? Me walking into a predominantly Mexican neighborhood with my 5th grade level of Spanish, as I said before, is not going to be effective and more likely will be detrimental to the goal. Another check mark is, are the non-work related needs accounted for? Daycare, something very simple. Lack of a personal vehicle, so is it near public transportation? Non-English language. There was an example of them doing community engagement in a predominantly Spanish-speaking community, all in English, right? That's problematic inherently. And then lastly of this short list, like I said, not comprehensive, are the wages provided enough for both dignity and livelihood? This is something that we've been seeing during the pandemic, where people are not going back to work for low wages because they rather find something that fills their soul. Something that will also pay for their family and pay them a living wage. And really that's critical in terms of whether you're going to have an equitable and inclusive solution. Now, this, as I said, is not comprehensive, but if you knock out just these 4 checklists, confident that your adoption of and your effectiveness within communities of color will greatly increase. So lastly, the time went really fast. So I do want to jump and start with kind of the things I'm working on, but I'm just going to jump to the last one. And that is inclusive utility investment programs. Now, this is also known as Tariff on Bill, and one of the major or the most the most used version of that is pay as you save. Uh, and there's three components of tariff inclusive utility investment program that is really attractive for me. The first is that this is not connected to an individual. The utility is investing into a meter. As such, whether you're a 10 or a billion owner, you can be eligible for this. You can be eligible for this program. Your credit score doesn't matter. Your how much money you make doesn't matter. Whether you're poor enough, rich enough, it doesn't matter. You're all eligible for this program. Second aspect of this is that the consumer protections list that the utility cannot take more. They recover their funds from the savings realized from, so they pay for the upgrade or electrification, and they recover their money from this electric bill savings. The consumer protection aspect of this means that they cannot take more than 80% of the projected savings over 80% of life. So if they're giving you a new heat pump that has a 15-year life, they can only take 80% of those savings and over 12 years. And then when that's over, you actually own that heat pump.
Anthony, are you trying to show us illustrations? I think you showed that and then it disappeared.
Thank
There
you.
it is.
Yes.
There we go.
Thank you, Sean. So the results of this is pretty staggering in terms of customer eligibility doubles. The number of offers accepted increases, where instead of 10% of people saying yes to it, you get closer to 50% or higher. In one program, there was like a 85% acceptance rate of this. Your deal size increases because the people aren't paying for it up front, and it's not a loan, so it's no financial detriment to them. And there's been no cases of default where someone's lights have been turned off because they were not able to pay the electric bill, which I think is critical in this conversation. And then last thing I'll say before I close out is that the really great thing about this is that the more inefficient a home, the higher the potential savings are, and as we all know, typically more inefficient homes are in communities of color because of redlining and other things, which means that service providers are incentivized to go to older neighborhoods, neighborhoods that are predominantly Black and brown, because that's where the greatest chances of energy savings to pay back for these upgrades are. And with that, I'll pause, and I'm at time. I apologize for not getting more time for questions.
But yeah, like leave up that slide. Just because you're being followed here by Will Vicent, who's senior leadership at the Energy Commission, and Danny Tam, and they many of the people on here, like Javier, who's here from PhD, these are people who need to clearly see that the rebate structure, and I just am getting hired, like right now, starting next week, a rebate program where I'm looking at this thinking they're offering $50,000 in rebates to a $60 million development. Is this going to be an effective incentive, considering the hugely disparate, and then is this the right use of the money? What does a $60 million developer do with a $60,000 check other than just give it as out as bonuses at the end of the day, that didn't incentivize much. So I mean, I see these really deep flaws in the approach, and what you're presenting here of focusing the money and changing the way that the system, like investing in the meter, yes, it's brilliant. That's why you have your doctorate. So thank you. Now, let's see. Anthony, Alice Long is saying, to your checklist, I'd add, shift power structures to share leadership and decision-making directly with the community. We had a wonderful presentation on that at the end of the day from Green Umbrella in Cincinnati. Like an effective, wonderful example. It's such that there is accountability to the community and reduce their risks involved. What do you think?
I totally agree. The more engagement early on, not kind of, oh, we put together solutions and then we come and tell you about it, but the actual back and forth, it's harder to do, but it's more rewarding, and the end result, you'll have a more effective solution as a result. So yes, completely agree, and I look forward to hearing that next one.
Then she thanked you. Robert Roby asked, customers still pay at the old payment schedule? Do they not see the savings for 12 years?
No, so they will see, essentially, they'll see about 20% of those savings immediately. And so that's the thing. So 80% will go to the utility, 20% will go to the person paying the bill. So they get free stuff, or they get all upgrades, electrification, whatever is in the program, and they see a reduction in their bill. Now they don't see the full reduction until it's paid off. But if you had no available way of paying for this anyway, then this is a great opportunity and great deal. I will add that there's some detractors saying, oh, they should get it all for free. Completely would love to see that. That's not reality though. There's not enough money out there for it, and there's not enough. The low income program, the low income funding that's available goes out in weeks. One, and two, there's no political will to increase that to the level that needs to reach all of those who fit that. And then lastly, there's a whole bunch of people who aren't poor enough to be eligible for it.
Yeah, all of those favor this strategy.